Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast, an exploration of the blurry line separating our physical world from our abstract realities. Conversations and stories, myths and reality, science and the gods we worship, the esoteric and the everyday. Come explore with me.
Okay. Hi, Roy. Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Yeah, absolutely. So we connected through Twitter or X, I guess is what we call it now. I think maybe we were commenting on somebody's thread, and then you saw that I had mentioned a bunch of stuff about depth psychology, and I think the phrase you used was mythopoetic, which I like that phrase. So I thought, hey, we started to kind of go back and forth a little bit about what got us into it, and a little bit about our stories. We didn't share much, but just kind of left it out there that there was a story to be shared, and so. I invited you on. I thought it'd be fun to just have a chat with you and kind of, I'm curious, anytime I come across somebody who thinks at all in the same way I do or gravitates towards the same type of, I don't know, mythic or symbolic interpretation of things, I'm just always curious as to what brought them there and I guess what they're doing with it, how they're moving forward in their life. So, I appreciate you being willing to chat with me and, yeah, I'm just really curious, about your story. I don't know where the best place to start. Maybe it's best to start now and just kind of fill us in on what it is you're doing, with myth and with coaching and that kind of thing. What's the offering that you're bringing right now?
Yeah. So, in terms of the day-to-day coaching, the myth doesn't always come through in the trenches doing the work. Sometimes I will bring in stories, but lately most of kind of what I do with men is more so on subconscious reprogramming of what have been the thoughts, beliefs that you've held on to that served you in a previous context of your life, but no longer serve you in terms of what you want to create and move towards now. But how I would say my whole website was born. So if people find my X handle, it's titled Sacred Wildman. And that came from inspiration. Are you familiar with Iron John by Robert Bly?
I haven't read it, but a friend of mine keeps telling me I need to.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the, I guess Robert Bly has been one of the top guys that's stood out in the men's mythopoetic sort of movement. And when I first read his book, it just clicked a whole bunch of things for me that were missing in terms of young boys, rites of passage, crossing over from boyhood into manhood.
Yeah, it does. The title of your, I guess, your website or your handle, what was it again? The Wildman?
Sacred Wildman.
Sacred Wildman. Yeah, it sounds very archetypal.
Yeah, there's a specific story in there about the wild man, and I won't spoil it too much, but the idea was that the wild man has been buried under years and years of unprocessed grief, and he's an absolutely primal archetypal force in a man's psychology. And so for me, growing up most of my life being more so the nice guy, people pleaser, it's very important to seek other people's approval, say yes, make sure I never upset anybody. That primal force was something that I had repressed or actively suppressed at times. And once I read Iron John and then thought about different characters, one of the questions I love to ask people, who's your favorite villain or anti-hero? That'll say something about a person's psychology, where in their normal day-to-day life, they might be like, oh, I'm the cheeriest person ever. Everybody says I'm a nice guy. But then I like this villain who happens to not care about anybody and just has his way with things. And so Sacred Wildman was kind of born out of that, this desire to free myself from this mental, emotional, psychological prison that I had put myself in. And then now that's something I support other men in as well, because it happens to be a lot of the men who have come to find me resonate with that nice guy archetype of I'm always seeking other people's approval, don't want to make anyone upset, but I'm also aware of this bitterness, this resentment that I've carried.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in our culture, and I guess in the Western culture, I can't speak too much for the East, but in a Western culture, there are certain aspects of masculinity, or boys, like young boys, before they even grow up to be men. There's certain aspects of their self that are suppressed, that are treated as if they're inappropriate, as if they're too primal or wild. And the ones that I really resonated with when I kind of went through this discovery for myself were anger and sexuality. And I think part of that for me as well was coming from a religious background.
Mm-hmm,
But those two things really get just, and the thing with anger, and this was something I learned along the way, is that anger is really kind of a secondary emotion to other emotions, and typically it's like a sadness or a sense of being mistreated. And so, yeah, we can get into all this, but I think it's prevalent. It's like it's all over the place. I saw it in my own life. I see it in friends, in siblings, and I think that there's like a big need for this type of work for men to have a place to go to kind of work through these things that just society just doesn't want to accept in them. So when you started kind of putting content up, was it during your own journey, or did you kind of get through it and then think, oh, I want to share this with others?
It was during my own journey. So starting out, 2020 was when I really started to put out content. YouTube, Instagram, those were the main two platforms. And it was much more story and personal processes, along with like, hey, I'm here available to support any men who are interested. Over time, it's evolved, like where things are now. It's more so sharing of teachings and practical things that men can apply. So that's where some of the original story and personal shares have kind of taken a backseat, and that's just been part of the evolution of it. But yeah, starting out, it was a lot more personal shares and stories.
Yeah. So do you mind sharing a little bit about like your upbringing, where you grew up and the kind of the environment, whether it was religious or not? And what did that look like?
Yeah, so my parents divorced when I was 8, and that was something I think for any child around that age was difficult to process. I didn't have any sort of outward grief towards it. All I knew was mom and dad are separating. I have no idea why. And I feel like I'm in this position of got to choose mom or got to choose dad. And that's a damn difficult decision for a child to make. And all the unconscious activity that's going on that I wasn't even aware of at the time. And then in terms of kind of beliefs growing up, I wasn't born into a religious family. Later on in college, I did have a couple of years where I was very devout Christian. Happy to go more into that because I went into a grad program for my master's in counseling psychology, which was a Christian school. Ironically, it was through that program that my beliefs got deconstructed and I came out very different than how I went in. Same with my intentions as well. Also only child. So growing up in that sort of environment, I think all the attention and focus was on me. There's no other sibling or person to really spread it across with. It was just me. And then in the end, I spent most of my time with my mom. So there was a period about maybe like 10 years where I didn't see my dad or have much contact or interaction with him. So in terms of my model of men, and masculinity, it was just sort of this empty space filled with stories that my mom would tell. And at the time as a kid, I thought, all right, mom's a good guy, dad's the bad guy. Well, why is that? Mainly because, well, I was used to, physical discipline from my dad. And then from my mom, I saw her more as the savior from that. But later it also evolved into lots of criticism, high demand, expectation, not being good enough, comparison with my friends, this, that. So there was a lot of this kind of emotional, psychological fusion with my mom. And again, as a child, not knowing any better, I gladly took that up and thought, I'm going to be the man that my dad wasn't, according to my mom, which creates a lot of fusion there, where some terms people have come up with is like son husbands or surrogate husband, the emotional caretaker for the mother. So that was kind of the soup I had been bathing in for most of my life prior to 2015 when I entered my master's program. And this kind of all got peeled apart. I was like, oh, shit. So things I had always thought about my mom isn't necessarily what I thought it to be. And then also by that point, I had reconciled my relationship with my dad. So a lot of things shifted.
Yeah, that's a lot to go through. It seems, I mean, that was a really succinct way of laying out different versions of, say, the mother wound and also the father wound, because you through with your mom, you end up with this situation where you're essentially married to her in a way, like you're filling that masculine role in her life.
Yeah.
Even though you're a child. And so, and then with your father, it's the absence then that creates the wound. And so he's just like a projection. He's like this imagined figure that you're holding up in your mind. Yeah, it's fascinating that what you said about your mom, like your relationship with your mom was such that you were trying to kind of be the things for her that your father could never be. Not to like belittle your situation at all, but I think that is what happens in our society in general, where even when the father is in the home, and I think the way that I see it, maybe this is just my interpretation, but when Freud, he talked about how in our entire society we have an Oedipus complex. And I'm sure you're familiar with the story of Oedipus, where he left and he came back, and unbeknownst to them, he fell in love with his mom. Like they didn't know, but they fell in love, right? And I think the way that you just described it is how I would describe it in kind of modern language, where whether the father is in the home or he's out of the home, there's just something where the child can see the disappointment that the mother experiences often at the hands of the man in her life. And particularly for young boys, there's just this sense of like always wanting to protect her. And then, and maybe you get into this a lot with the people you work with, or maybe even in your own self-work, but you carry that forward then into the relationships you might have with other women. And so you have this experience of, it's like this belief that boys grow up with, and I suffered from it for a long time as well, where you have this idea of like the women in your life, their happiness is up to you, and you can never let them down. You can never disappoint them.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, did you grow up in a divorced household, or you experienced this even?
Oh, no. Yeah. I guess it's fair that I could share my background too. So, no, my parents are actually still married, but, yeah, I grew up in a very religious setting. And so, the way that it worked in my house was that I'll just be like very frank about it. Like, in my house, there was like a classic narcissistic structure where one person's emotions were paramount to all other things. And so I would say that was my mom. Like my mom's emotions took precedence over everybody else's emotions, everybody else's feelings and experiences. And my father, while he was there, he was a breadwinner and he was present. He was never, I never had like any kind of real conversations with my dad. He was kind of like the guy who would be gone, and then when he came home, he was there to lay down the law or be the authority in the house. But yeah, it was a very religious situation. I was raised Mormon or LDS, and a lot of people are raised LDS, and I think they probably turn out like having great relationships with their family. But in my situation, we were just like kind of different, at least from the other people that I grew up around, where my mom, she decided to homeschool us, and we also lived in the country. And so it was like, my environment was unhealthy family dynamics where there was no communication and no emotional interactions. There wasn't like touching or hugging or anything like that. We were isolated in the country. We were poor. We had a big family. So there's like 7 kids. When I was in my more developmental years, there were probably only 4 or 5 of us then, because I was in I was on the older side of the kids. But yeah, I grew up in this way, and I just thought that this was reality. And I came into my adolescent and adulthood with a lot of social anxiety, a lot of inability to understand relationships, an inability to to like recognize my own emotional states and to understand why I felt the way I felt. So it was a lot of suppressing the discomfort of my life. And so I walked around with a lot of depression and a lot of like a pit in my stomach a lot, just because I wasn't properly addressing, the things that were coming up. And I also, I ended up being fully involved in the religion as well. And so when I was 19, I went on an LDS mission to South Korea. And then I came home, and my wife and I met through friends, but we're all members of the church. We ended up being married in the church. And it wasn't, to come full circle, it was when I had a child of my own and we started taking him to church that like these alarm bells started going off. And I realized, I was like, oh, like I can't put my kid through the experience that I went through, because I want my kid to be like way better off than I was. And so, yeah, so I'm probably about 10 years into this process now, but it all started with my wife and I going like, hey, do we really believe this church? And the more we dove into it from an intellectual kind of history, thinking through it, like looking at like the actual characters who were involved in the foundation of it, the more we came to see that, oh, like there's a reason. Like it was kind of like my entire life I had been uncomfortable with the situation, even though I had publicly proclaimed that I believed the church and that it was important to me. I would always throughout my entire life been uncomfortable. I had this emotional dissonance with it, but I was so unaware of my emotions. I was so removed from them that I had always been able to kind of rationalize it. But as soon as I allowed my rational side to actually think about it, actually look into it, that emotional discomfort just kind of paired with it, and it made total sense as to why I was never, I never felt comfortable in the situation. So for me, that was like the first big step away from the life that I had grown up in. And in a way I thought, oh, like this will change things. I'll feel different. I'll be happier. And in a lot of ways I was, but at the same time, there was still a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety, social anxiety, and a lot of just, I still just had a lot of avoidant characteristics. Like I was just avoiding problems. And a couple years, 3-4 years into that, I realized that a big part of my problem was the family that I grew up in, not just the religion, but the family itself. And so I started to address those issues. I tried to talk to my parents a number of times, and that never went well. And at some point, I decided to make a break with them, and all of my problems gradually have just kind of gotten, like, my life has just gradually gotten better and better from an emotional perspective, from like a happiness perspective, fulfillment. I'm just yeah. And then to bring this back to our conversation about the mother wound and how that plays into relationships, by that point I had gone through 2 cycles of letting things go and figuring out that there's still a world out there. Like, I can still exist and be happy without these old stories. And so the third thing that came up for me was my relationship with my wife. And we had married in a religion, and we had like started our entire lives based on these ideas. We had had children based on these ideas. And so it just turned out that there were a lot of things that we needed to work out between ourselves. And a big part of that was that I had put her up on a pedestal. You know how men do. We put the woman in our life up on a pedestal, and we try to always make sure that she's happy and that we never disappoint her. And so in a way, we had just in an unaware way, we had created a very codependent relationship. And I was just exhausted. I couldn't keep doing it. I throughout our marriage, if there were times that I had just avoided being honest because I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I didn't want to distress her. And I just got to the point where I realized, like, we both just need to grow up and be ourselves in a relationship where neither one of us is 100% dependent on the other. And so that was like the third big awakening in our life. And fortunately, we've been able to navigate all 3 of those phases together. And it's been hard, and there have been some really dark moments and some really sad moments. But at the same time, we're now at a place that is so much healthier and so much better than we've ever been, because we just kept sticking it out. We kept choosing each other. So that's like my long version of, there are these three different aspects of the journey that I've been through, and that was like church, family, and then marriage relationship.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's beautiful how you and also you and your wife navigated through that. Makes sense. Kind of we were talking in the DMs, the dark night of the soul that occurs before these realizations and harvesting the gold from all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And each one of them has been that. When we finally decided to step away from the religion of our upbringing, there was life just felt so much lighter, and we weren't burdened by so many little things. But there are challenges to it as well, because all of a sudden there was no playbook. That's what it's like when you step outside of a story, is you suddenly don't have a playbook. It was a strange realization, because the entire time that I was religious, I never really felt like I needed to pray for guidance, like I needed help, because there was always just, this is what you're supposed to do. And then as soon as that wasn't there anymore, as soon as I didn't have some kind of dogmatic way of looking at life, all of a sudden I was like, what do I do? Like, who do I turn to? And really, you feel this, you go through this experience of realizing that you just have that sense all of a sudden that, it would be nice to have somebody to turn to say a prayer to and get an answer from, even though the entire time I was religious, I never had that experience. Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk. I think one thing that you talk, or that you emphasize, both on that I've seen on X and then also in perusing your website, is this idea of nice guy, being a nice guy. It's definitely something that I've had to figure out, particularly in my relationship. But I would like to hear it from your perspective. Like, what does it mean? What does it mean to be a nice guy? Why is it troublesome to be a nice guy? And where does it all stem from, do you think?
So what it means to be a nice guy, I think, comes to this core belief of somehow who I am. And this is, I think, this is inspired by the work of No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. You're familiar, like that's been the quote unquote Bible for nice guys. And something he said is his sense is that the nice guy's core belief is that who I am, how I behave, what I do is fundamentally not good enough. And so therefore I must do all of these other things, perform, act in order to be okay in the eyes of other people, in my standing with other people. And so that can manifest in behaviors such as people pleasing, which, another term could be emotional caretaking. If somebody else is upset, angry, maybe that's mom, maybe that's dad, maybe that's your wife, then somehow that's your responsibility as the nice guy. Okay, I didn't do something right because now mom, dad, or wife, whoever, my boss is angry. I need to make amends for this. And so there's a huge amount of energy devoted into how can I make this right? How can I make you happy? That was the mantra for one of my clients, which he was asking his mom, his girlfriend, how can I make you happy? And it didn't ever work. And that was a painful headache for him. Besides people pleasing, I think there's something else that will manifest is smiling a lot, but when it's not actually genuine. That was something I did quite frequently. It's kind of this nervous smile, like the equivalent to at a social gathering, if I felt anxious, oftentimes like I would take sips of water when I didn't need to sip any more water. But I would do that with my smile. So like, hey, yeah, I'm okay. Like, are you okay? I want to make sure you're okay. But it was kind of this projection of my own inner restlessness out into my surroundings and the people around me. So yeah, emotional caretaking, people pleasing, trying to say yes as often as possible because that's seen as what is polite, what is nice, what is good. There's an equating of nice equals good. And if you're not nice, like if you say no, then that's bad. So I think those are the core components that stick out to me is what a nice guy is or how does he behave. And for me, I think, which may be the case for a lot of other men too, is it stems from early childhood experiences, the family upbringing, those early formative experiences, something within the household that let that boy know through his own filter, because not every boy does this. So some boys go the opposite direction. But for a lot of boys who fit the nice guy archetype, the internalization is, mom is upset or dad is upset or my parents are upset. I must have done something wrong. I must be responsible somehow. So let me see what I can do to make things better. And by making things better, it means behaving better or doing more things for mom and dad to make sure they're okay emotionally. So again, that emotional caretaker role. Broadly, I think in society, especially Western society, some men who may not have grown up with that, but have started to lean more into the nice guy archetype, I think has come from some societal messages. So when Me Too became very big, and there were a lot of these messages that good-hearted men, like tender-hearted, good-hearted men were hearing was, wow, okay, so many women around me are talking about how they've been sexually assaulted, experienced these things in relation to men. That sucks. And I don't want to be one of those men. I want to be one of the safe men. I want to be the one who can protect women, not make them feel unsafe being a woman in this world. So how do I do that? And the conclusion I think many well-meaning men come to is, I'll be nicer, I'll be safer. And there is kind of a unconscious denial of his own masculine edge to be more palatable, to be more safe, to take up less space. yeah, that's what comes to mind to your question.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost as if the word that comes to mind as you were saying that was just trying to be more gentle in a way. And yeah, everything you were talking about there really resonates with me, even up and through my marriage. And even when you first started, you were talking about men who are trying to make the women in their lives happy. And I think that that's just, it could have come from my family. It could have come from the religion I grew up in. But there was this idea that you marry somebody and then like the whole purpose of the marriage is to make the other person happy.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds very nice, but it's very naive because every person who's on the planet, their happiness is their own job. Like you can't, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how much you bend over backwards, you're not going to make other people happy. And then also just realizing that nobody else can make me happy. It's not anybody else's job for me to be happy. And I think that maybe this will get us into a little bit of Jungian thought, because that's a little bit of for me, that took a little bit of shadow work of like getting into myself and realizing there's like this big part of that's this acceptance that if I'm unhappy, it's my fault. And looking around at everything that I'm displeased with and, pulling back the projections of accusing somebody else, of saying, oh, it's their fault, they're the reason. And just really looking at myself and saying, oh, everything that I dislike about my life, it's my fault. Yeah. So the program you were going through, it sounds like it wasn't necessarily geared towards Jungian psychology. Is that right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So how did you chance upon Jung, and what what did that look like?
So he was brought up in one of our courses. I forgot the title, History of something. And so, of course, two of the big names, right? Freud and Jung were mentioned, and then other ones of prominent male, female therapists. Jung was just brought up like, hey, he was a guy who was kind of a disciple or apprentice to Freud, and then later diverged because he disagreed with some of the more sexual, libidinized focus that Freud was really into. But apart from that, it wasn't too much else. I think my own curiosities with Jungian psychoanalysis came from somebody brought up the Red Book in one of our classes. She just had this huge Red Book.
The Red Book is a wild place to start with you.
Yeah.
It's like, that's really just diving right in. Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't read it myself or looked through all of it, but when she showed it to me and I was looking at all like his own drawings and paintings, I was like, wow, this is remarkable. And sometimes it's almost a little bit difficult to trace, like, where exactly did Jung start kind of showing up and appearing more in my life? I think also some other YouTube videos that just I was exploring really resonated with me, which was this, you brought it up, shadow work, and also anima, animus. I think those concepts were super fascinating that Jung brought up, like the aspect of the male within a woman being the animus, and then the aspect of the woman within a man, the anima. And really, he seemed very ahead of his time in terms of integration of these polarities of the yin and the yang within every individual. But shadow work, I think, was the big thing that really flipped things around for me, which was, I think, the way Jung defines shadow is that which we're not conscious of. And shadow doesn't mean bad, evil, or wrong. It just means that which is unconscious, that has not had a light shined upon it. So sometimes shadows can manifest as thoughts, behaviors that might terrify us. Like, oh, speaking about the nice guy, like, oh, I'm realizing that I actually think this woman is a bitch, even though I'm behaving towards her in a way where from the outside, it just looks like I want her to love and accept me. But here I am harboring resentful thoughts about her and how I'm giving her all this attention, affection that she never asked for, but she's not returning it. What is wrong with her? And why do these women go for those douchebag men while here I am, this wonderful, nice guy? Speaking for myself here, those were the thoughts and feelings that were there that I think kind of depict the shadow at play. But shadow can also mean sometimes a shadow is exactly where a person's gifts lie. Like once you shine the light there and then, quote unquote, harvest the gold, then it becomes what Jung called the golden shadow, which is one of your greatest gifts, dharma, service to the world. So I think you had a third question in there earlier with the nice guy, but why is it not good, or why is it harmful to be stuck in the nice guy behaviors, the archetype? And that is, it prolongs your own suffering as a man, because it was an adaptation to a specific context in your life that kept you alive for a certain period of time. So in my case, being the nice guy was a way to alleviate the tension between my parents as they were going through the divorce. And then when I was with my dad, and then when I was with my mom, like, I'm going to be the good boy. I don't want mom to leave, because if mom leaves, then like dad left, then what'll happen to me? So that worked. And that's something that I hear some people say, you just need to fucking kill the nice guy. I get it. I think there's some, men are drawn to some of that attitude of like, just shut up, dig your feet in, and like do the heavy work, push forward. There's something about that enlivens men. And I don't think it's really about killing so much as having a more fully integrated experience of understanding, okay, how as a nice guy, those behaviors function in your life to keep you alive. In a certain point in your life, in a specific context, let's appreciate and thank that aspect of you. Like, how brilliant of your mind to, for your own survival, develop that mechanism to support you in this time period where you didn't know anything else. Like, kudos to that. And now we can kind of do this little send off of, thank you for all that you've done. I'm going to take it from here, like the more whole, true self, the integrated self. And then the energy from all of that, all the imposter syndrome, all the overthinking, all the caretaking, people pleasing, that's a lot of energy. Now it gets to be reintegrated to this whole self to then create the life in the kind of relationships that you do want.
Yeah, well said. The energy thing is so fascinating to me, because energy is something I struggled with my entire life. And it wasn't until I began to do what you're saying, the integration of these parts of myself that I wasn't being, the things where you're either suppressing or you're overacting. Either both of those take energy. And once you can see what you're doing and you can stop doing it, the energy shift in your life is real. It was shocking to me, because being tired and worn out and always kind of down and depressed, it was just so normal to me. It was just, I thought this is just what life feels like. But being able to be able to not worry what other people think. And so you're not trying to people please. You're not trying to put on some kind of a mask or a persona, a performance. And then also to then also not have to constantly fight back the negative emotions, the negative thoughts. Oh man, the energy release it's worth the entire journey, is just to have the energy back. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious for you, because one of the things that was important for me was integrating anger and specifically something I call healthy aggression. So I created this meditation called the healthy aggression meditation because this is something I think a lot of men who experience nice guy syndrome can benefit from. And there's a certain stigma, I think, that people have around anger, as in it's it's not very palatable. This isn't an emotion that you should really express too much, if at all. And when that happens, it's almost as if that anger, if we were to anthropomorphize it as an entity on its own, it gets more angry with this message of, oh, so it's not okay for me to be acknowledged here and what I have to offer, because I do have some things to offer. So fine, I'll find more sideways ways to express myself in your life, whether that's shutting the fridge a little too hard, road rage, or dreams. So I'm curious for you, how was integrating that, like anger or a healthy sense of aggression, something that showed up for you?
Oh man. To be honest, when I first realized that I just had all this pent up anger, and a lot of it was just, it was two things. It was not, similar to what I had said earlier, I think that anger is kind of like a coin, and when you flip it over, the other side is sadness. And so for me, the anger, working through anger was also working through sadness. And so there were two types of releases that I needed. One was that I needed to mourn. I needed to like let the sadness out through tears and crying. And that was something I went through for a little while. And it was pretty intense. Like I went from having never cried in my life that I could remember to just uncontrollable sobbing, you know? And so that was actually very relieving, even from an anger perspective. It's just letting it out in that way. But then also, I also felt like I really needed to let out anger through an aggressive act, and I didn't want it to be bothersome to anybody else. And so this was when I was living in Arizona. I went up to there's a reservoir north of Phoenix called Lake Pleasant. And anybody who lives there would know about it, but it's just like a desert reservoir. It's just surrounded by rocks and dirt. But I got on a kayak and I went way out into the middle of the reservoir, and I just screamed as loud as I could and just let it out that way. But then part of it was, one of the reasons why I realized I would get angry is because I didn't have healthy boundaries. And so the reason you feel sad or you feel mistreated, which then leads to anger, is because you're not standing up for yourself. You're letting people walk on you, either emotionally or in, whether it's at work, at home, with family, friends, whatever it is. You start to realize that you need to set healthy boundaries. And so going back to this idea of energy, when you realize that you have an unhealthy relationship with somebody, you realize you could see that actually what's happening is that they're either taking your energy or you're taking their energy. In a way, they're crossing your boundaries or you're crossing their boundaries. And if it's not being spoken out loud, or if people aren't standing up for themselves, it becomes very unhealthy and toxic. And so for me, deciding that I wasn't going to put up with other people's unhealthy behavior towards me, that was a huge part of managing my anger. And I think that was what it took, was that kind of maybe healthy aggression that you're talking about, where it's not about yelling at people. It's not about trying to be strong physically or intimidate them, threaten them. It's just having courage to say, hey, this thing happens between us and I don't like it and I don't want it to keep happening. And some people, there are a lot of great people out there who will go, oh man, I'm sorry. Let's not do that anymore. And the people who've been willing to do that are still my really good friends. Like because you realize that if you can communicate with somebody in that way, you're both on some type of a trajectory towards growth. And as long as somebody is genuinely willing to try to grow, they're going to be humble enough to hear and then, reciprocate. And if you can do the same for them, if you're on a trajectory of growth, you can hear what they have to say about you. You can look into your own shadow when somebody else points it out, and you can say, okay, I understand, and I will work on that. What happened for me was this idea of having boundaries with people. It worked as a forcing mechanism in relationships. So either the relationships got better or the relationships completely fell apart. I would just have to walk away from them. And so now I'm at a point where I kind of can see all of these interactions in this way where I can think to myself, is this person being genuine with me? Can I be honest with them and they will listen and reciprocate? And if they can't, if they won't, if they're, I already have kids of my own, so I don't need other immature people in my life. I don't need people to take my energy. So I've been, and I think I see that you hear about this a lot with people who are on this kind of a journey of trying to heal or figure themselves out, where there are people you have to walk away from. And there have been plenty of people in my life from the past who I just don't have the ability to really communicate with anymore because they're not willing to hear me. And so the healthy aggression for me has been setting boundaries. Some of it, you do have to be vocal, and some of it you just say, oh, like, I'm just not going to interact with this person anymore. But the second part then is if somebody is not going to respect your boundaries, emotional boundaries, personal boundaries, whatever it may be, then part of the healthy aggression is either calling them out on it or just like having the courage to walk away. And once I do that, I don't know, I'm at a point now where I'm not that bothered by it. It's I'm very stoic about it. It's not something that's necessarily within my control. And so I'm not going to force somebody else.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force somebody to behave in a certain way, but at the same time, if they're going to behave in a way that's going to elicit anger in me, or because it's making me feel mistreated, then I don't have to give them my time. I don't have to give them my energy. I think that I hope that answers the question, but I think that's been the approach for me, because I don't want to. The idea of healthy aggression, it can't possibly be physical aggression, raising your voice, those kind of things. That's not what's needed in most cases.
Yeah.
I don't know. What about? I'd love to hear. Yeah, I'd love to turn the question on you and just hear your response.
Yeah, I think you put it really well in terms of how you navigated that in your own life in maturing and evolving. I would agree that aggression, when I had looked up, the etymology, it simply meant to advance or move forward. And then even the word confrontation, when people hear the word confrontation, there's, oh, no, that's, violent, or that's aggressive. And confront simply would, the etymology is to face towards. And so with both of those things, aggression, confrontation, it's simply a willingness to face towards the thing that we had been avoiding for some time. And anger can happen, one of the reasons, from avoiding and ignoring something. So a fun example for me was I had been living in this apartment for pretty much 20 years of my life, long time. And there was this upstairs neighbor who, maybe once a week, sometimes more, would blast pretty loud music, and I could feel the vibrations, I could hear it. And it wasn't until year 20 or so that I just finally went upstairs to talk to him about it. So that long of a period. So sometimes it can take some time. And it was right before flying out to Arizona for a men's retreat. And I was also in a very, I think, unique and kind of fiery place with where I was. And so I thought, you know what? I have an early flight tomorrow. I don't want to grumble to myself this entire evening of why this guy won't shut his music off, because of course he shouldn't shut his music off if nobody's talking to him about it. even if I assume, hey, idiot, why don't you turn your music down? Because surely you should know it's loud enough. He might not have that in his mind at all. So I said, all right, I'm going to go upstairs for the first time in 20 years. I'm going to knock on his door. I'm just going to talk to him. And that's exactly what I did. I went upstairs. Meanwhile, heart beating, more excitation in the nervous system. And it wasn't a shouting match or anything like that. I just knocked on his door and I said, hey, would you mind turning your music down? It's giving me a headache. And he said, oh, is it too loud? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, sure. And then I went downstairs, no more vibrating walls, no more loud music. And then I slept fine that night. And that was, something small, seemingly even dumb. Like, wow, Roy, it took you 20 years? Yep. Took that amount of time before it finally clicked of, I can do something about this. And I was completely okay, even if the outcome didn't work out how I wanted it to. Because I could go up there and that guy, who, for all I know, he could have been like, hey, punk, why don't you just get some earplugs? Even worse case scenario, I think sometimes nice guys, people who have experienced a lot of anxiety, can catastrophize. What's the worst case scenario? So I thought that this guy could pull a gun on me. It's like, what do you think? What do you think you're doing talking to me about, turning my music down? It was like, but I'm just going to do it anyways. At least I can say I did it. I tried. And that just was a pattern interrupt that shifted just a lot on a subtle level for me. It was not like a huge death and rebirth, but it was just one of those simple moments that changed the tone of everything.
Yeah, that's so fascinating because in a way, it seems like such a simple thing, you're just asking somebody not to do something. But I think that what you just described is probably the same difficulty that takes place, because I always think about humanity and psychology. I say this all the time on here, but if you really look at psychology, even Jungian psychology, where there's a conscious and an unconscious, and there's an ego and a shadow, and there's all these archetypes playing inside of it, that model works for a single individual, but it also works for groups. And that's why he talks about the individual unconscious and the collective unconscious.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the very example you just gave about just simply asking somebody, hey, could you turn your music down? That same situation plays out, I think, on the geopolitical level all the way up to the biggest things. And those thoughts that are going through your head, like, is he going to be angry? Is he going to put me down? Is there going to be violence? Those are that's the unconscious side of things, where even on much broader scale, we get ourselves into trouble by not just letting the confrontation take place. Because in most cases, most neighbors I've had, that response that you got is the typical response. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be bothering anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fascinating. So when that happened for you, how did that feel? Like, did you feel, there must have been some feeling of like, wow, I did that and it worked and somebody listened to me.
Yeah.
Like,
for sure.
what was it like?
I would describe it as like pouring sparkling water into a glass and the bubbles are like rising. There was kind of this rise. I think maybe effervescent is the right word, but yeah, there was this rise of like, wow, I did that 20 years and finally did that. And it was fine. It was just fine. And now I get to sleep at night without loud music and, wake up refreshed for this early flight. It was very fulfilling and gratifying. And I shared that story at the men's retreat. And interestingly, with some of the men there who were older than I was, they said, dude, like, I would have reacted the way you had been those years prior. Like, I wouldn't want to bother them or anything. So, like, good on you. Like, how did you do that?
Yeah, that's awesome. The thought that comes to me as well is, if you think about say aggression as a kind of a scale, So there's a polarity to it. So one polarity would be the way that you were reacting for those 20 years, where you were just ignoring it. You're going to be, I'm going to be small. I'm not going to make a scene. I'm going to shrink. And that's, I've definitely experienced that. I can think of many experiences where I just shrunk. But the other polarity of that is to up the aggression and to go pound on the door and shout and threaten. And I've done that as well in my life, where I've just come with way too much aggression, where Aristotle had this idea that virtues were somewhere in the middle. That aggression on one side, there's going to be like too much. On the other side, there's too little. But the virtuous, or what you call the healthy aggression, is going to be somewhere in the middle, and where you can assert yourself, you can hold a boundary, but you don't have to do it by going over somebody else's boundary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And when you're speaking to the collective unconscious, I don't know if Jung spoke about this. I'm sure people have quoted Jung about this, but certain archetypes that rise into the spotlight in specific periods of our time to identify what hasn't yet been integrated in the collective. And when I think about the different extremes or pendulums of aggression that you just described so well, Andrew Tate red pill stuff, I don't know if you've kind of gone into any of those rabbit holes, have become quite popular in the past couple of years. There's been this people call it hyper masculinity, like a lot of the bravado, shirtless muscles, shades, and speaking in some very unsavory ways about women, but also men to some degree, and saying, this is what you need to do to be a man, to stop being, a little wuss, XYZ. And there's a lot of shouting and bravado, which I think would be an example of actually an anima possession. Right? A lot of these men will say, I'm not emotional. Women are the ones that are emotional. Meanwhile, there's all this loud posturing that is anything but not emotional.
Yeah, it's very imbalanced.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that is, you're right on with that middle point or that middle way. And I think the way reality or the universe works, it just seems to be that certain extremes will be brought into the spotlight as an opportunity for people to integrate rather than react and either swing from one side of the pendulum or to the other. Is to take that, like almost Plato's cave allegory. You see these shadows on the wall, recognize what the shadow is, and then integrate that within yourself. Because if each individual in our society is intentional about doing this, I think many of the issues that we see across society, the geopolitical you spoke of, would very much diffuse quite quickly. But that's a huge task for people to undertake, is to integrate, stare at their own shadow, and come into that more integrated whole in the middle. And speaking to, I think, examples of masculinity, I still love the portrayal of Aragorn by Viggo Mortensen in Lord of the Rings. I think that just the way he demonstrates his masculinity, it's not a very loud one, but he's absolutely capable of violence if needed, defending Frodo, the people he loves. But other times, he's singing, he's poetic, very grounded.
Yeah, absolutely. When I first started reading Jung and starting to try to understand the archetypes, I had this understanding or this idea that maybe at different times you're supposed to kind of embody an archetype. And in having conversations like this, I came to see that, oh no, you're never supposed to embody an archetype. You're supposed to use certain energies from an archetype, use certain powers from an archetype, but never become that archetype. And when you talk about somebody like Andrew Tate having an anima possession, I think you're spot on, because what happens is, or at least the way that I interpret it, is that when we have, we started this conversation talking about a mother wound, a father wound. When you have a wound that you never work on healing, you never do shadow work to kind of, when you're a kid and you develop that wound, what develops along with it is a complex. And essentially what a complex is a part of us that stopped developing, it stopped growing. And so rather than have the ability to be ourselves, to be our true self in a mature way, we latch onto archetypes. And so for this masculine side of things that you're talking about, it's almost as if a lot of, the Andrew Tates of the world, they've latched onto an archetype that is far too, I don't know, aggressive in a way that's very unhealthy. Like it's as if they want to be the warrior archetype, and in so doing, it creates this imbalance, because we are multitude. There are so many aspects of us, and anytime we latch on to one specific piece, we do so to the detriment of all the others. And yeah, I think I completely agree with you, though, what you're saying about if everybody could do this type of work, if everybody could do shadow work, and they could look at themselves and they could look at the problems in their life and say, well, how am I causing this? That right there, I think, is the solution to our individual problems, our problems in our small collectives, our friends groups, our families. And I think with time, that would be the process of figuring it out for the entire planet. It really is like turning inward. There's too much projecting outward, and there needs to be a lot more turning inward.
Yeah. And something that's helped shift my perspective is, like, I've been used to thinking of projection as, okay, it's a bad thing. And then someone said that, well, it's not necessarily even bad, but it's a mechanism of the ego or the mind. It just happens. But it's a very useful tool if you use whatever it is that you're projecting as a mirror to do that inner work. And, so far we've been speaking just now about masculinity side. It's also been fascinating to see how it's taken shape for women and the feminine. In the kind of polarity world, I've seen that pendulum swing for women as well, where on one end you have, feminists that have evolved to this point of animus possession, doing the very, not necessarily the same physical, but it can in some instances, but very violent and aggressive ways in which they speak of men, promoting violence. And then to this other end of, women who have been very much in the boss babe energy of, I don't need a man. I'm very independent too. I want the trad life. I want to be in my soft girl feminine era where I can just turn my brain off and he just makes all the decisions. I think there are these wild swings in which people are attempting to integrate and just haven't quite settled into. Actually, it's not either this or that, but it's that adaptability, flexibility to know what is required in a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's saying yes, and it's like the integration of the other within yourself. And I've definitely seen that with women as well, even on a personal level, where the inability to integrate their masculine side turns them into very controlling, loud, just unpleasant people. And yeah, this type of work is just so valuable across the board, I think. And as far as becoming that integration, it's like saying, like you're saying, it's not this or that, it's this and that. It takes an adult mind, it takes a mature mind to be able to accept paradox in an answer.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's part of what shadow work is accepting that yes, I am good, but yes, I am also bad. And it's that balance, seeing how you actually are a more balanced, like you do have these polarities, and trying to achieve a balance between them rather than lean one way or the other, that I think is probably the most beneficial work that people could do for themselves. So,
Yeah.
Roy, we've been going for over an hour now. It goes by quick, but yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think I could probably talk to you for many more hours, especially since we hardly got into the myth side of things. So maybe in the future I'll have to have you come back and we can just dive into other things as well.
Happy to do a part two.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, really great talking to you. I think you've well, first of all, congratulations on going down this journey yourself and like figuring a lot of it out for yourself, but also very cool to turn around and help other men with it as well. If people are looking if they want to learn more about you, they want to work with you, where would they find you?
My website, sacredwildman.com. It's the best way to reach me. And if you use Instagram, X, YouTube, same thing. It's at Sacred Wildman.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much, Roy. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh.